Your house makes noises at night. You know that. The fridge hums, the pipes tick, the floors creak when the temperature drops. You've heard these sounds 1,000 times, and you've trained yourself to ignore every single one of them. But what happens when you hear a sound that doesn't belong? A sound you've never heard before. A sound that makes you freeze under your covers and hold your breath because something deep in the back of your brain is screaming at you that you are not alone. These three people know exactly what that feels like. And after hearing their stories, you might never feel completely safe in your own home again. Before we get into it, I need you to do two things for me. Hit subscribe, because most of you watching this aren't subscribed, and you're missing videos every single week. And drop a like on this video right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this channel more than you realize. All right, lights off, let's go.
The basement door.
This happened to me about 2 years ago. I was 26 and living alone in a rented house on the outskirts of a small town in Indiana. It was one of those old two-story places with a detached garage, a big backyard that backed up to a cornfield, and a basement that I used maybe 3 times the entire year I lived there. The house was cheap for a reason. It was at least 60 years old, poorly insulated, and far enough from town that the nearest neighbor was a solid quarter-mile down the road. But I worked remotely and didn't need much. A quiet place with decent internet was all I cared about. I should mention that the basement had this heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs that opened into the kitchen. The door had a sliding bolt lock on the kitchen side, which I always kept locked. Not because I was afraid of anything, I just didn't like the idea of that door swinging open on its own in the middle of the night. Old houses shift and doors don't always stay shut. The bolt gave me peace of mind. That's all. One Wednesday night in November, I was sitting on the couch watching a movie. It was around 11:30. The house was dead quiet except for the TV. I had all the lights off downstairs because I liked watching movies in the dark. The only light in the room was the glow from the screen. I was maybe 40 minutes into the movie when I heard a sound from the kitchen. A single loud knock. Not a tap, a knock. Like someone rapping their knuckles against wood one time. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing. I sat there for a good 30 seconds, just staring into the dark kitchen doorway. Then I unmuted the TV and went back to the movie. Probably the house settling. That's what I told myself. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Same sound, same direction. One knock. This time I got up. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light. Everything looked normal. Dishes in the rack. My coffee mug from that morning still on the counter. I looked at the basement door. The bolt was still locked. Stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. I turned the light back off and went back to the couch, but I didn't unmute the TV. I just sat there in the silence, watching the screen with no sound, and waited. The third knock came about 10 minutes later, and this time, I was ready for it. I was listening carefully, and I heard it clearly. It was coming from the basement door. Someone or something was on the other side of that door, at the top of the basement stairs. And they were knocking. One single knock. I didn't move. I sat on that couch and stared at the kitchen doorway, and I felt my entire body go cold. The bolt was locked. Whatever was down there couldn't get through. That's what I kept repeating in my head. The bolt is locked. The bolt is locked. Then the fourth knock came, and it wasn't one knock anymore. It was 3. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. The exact way a person knocks on a front door when they want to be let in. I grabbed my phone and called 911. I told them I thought someone had broken into my basement. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. I sat there on the couch for the next 14 minutes without moving. The knocking didn't happen again. Not once. The silence was almost worse, because now I was just sitting there, imagining what was standing on the other side of that door. 2 officers arrived and I let them in through the front. I explained the situation, and one of them asked me if the basement had an exterior entrance. I felt my stomach sink. I honestly didn't know. I had barely been down there. I told them I wasn't sure, and one of them went outside with a flashlight to check the perimeter while the other stayed with me. The officer outside radioed back in less than 2 minutes. There was a cellar door on the side of the house. One of those old angled hatch doors that leads down into the basement from outside. It was wide open. The 2 officers went down through the exterior entrance. I stayed in the kitchen with my hand on the bolt. They were down there for maybe 5 minutes. When they came back up, they told me the basement was clear, but that someone had definitely been down there. There were muddy boot prints on the concrete floor, leading from the cellar door to the bottom of the interior stairs. The prints went up every single step. Whoever it was had walked up those stairs and stood on the other side of the door that I was sitting 15 feet away from. One of the officers told me that based on the prints, the person had been standing at the top of the stairs for a while. The mud had pooled under their feet. That means they weren't just passing through. They walked up to my door, and they waited there, in the dark, on the other side of a half-inch piece of wood, while I sat on my couch 12 feet away, thinking it was the house settling. The officers checked the rest of the house and the yard, but found no one. They told me to get the cellar door secured and to call if anything else happened. I didn't sleep in that house that night. I drove to a friend's place and stayed there until the morning. The next day, I went back, got a padlock for the cellar door, and called a locksmith to add a deadbolt to the basement door. I also installed 2 cameras, one covering the backyard and one covering the side of the house where the cellar entrance was. For the next 3 weeks, nothing happened. I started to relax. I started telling myself it was probably some homeless person looking for shelter and that the padlock had solved the problem. I almost believed it. Then, one night, around 2 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone from the backyard camera. I opened the app and watched the live feed. A man was standing at the edge of my backyard, where the grass met the cornfield, just standing there. Hands at his sides, facing the house. Not moving. I watched him on the screen for almost 4 minutes. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't look around. He just stood there staring at my house, like he was studying it. Then he turned slowly and walked back into the corn and disappeared. I called the police again. They came out but didn't find anyone. The corn was too dense and too tall to search effectively in the dark. I checked the camera footage the next day and went back through the previous weeks. He had been there before. 3 other nights that I had slept through without getting alerts because the sensitivity on the camera was set too low. Same spot every time. Same posture, same direction. Always between 1 and 3 in the morning, always alone. I moved out 2 weeks later, broke the lease, and paid the penalty. I never found out who that person was. I don't know what they wanted from me. I don't know how many times they came to that house before I installed the cameras. And I don't know how many times they stood at the top of those basement stairs on the other side of that thin wooden door. Before the night, I finally heard them knock. That's the part that keeps me up. Not what happened. What might have been happening for weeks or months before I ever knew.
3 nights of noise.
I'm 23 and I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building in Portland, Oregon. I've lived here for about a year and a half, and until last month I felt completely safe. The building has a secure entrance with a keypad, cameras in the lobby and stairwells, and my apartment has a deadbolt and a chain lock. I'm on the 3rd floor with no fire escape access to my windows. Getting into my apartment uninvited would be genuinely difficult. That's what I kept telling myself when the noises started. The first night was a Sunday. I had gone to bed around midnight, which is normal for me. I'm a light sleeper, so any unusual sound tends to wake me up. At around 2:15, I woke up to what I can only describe as a dragging sound, like something heavy being slowly pulled across the floor. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, and then stopped. I lay there with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what I had just heard. My first thought was the upstairs neighbor moving furniture. People do weird things at weird hours. I closed my eyes and went back to sleep. The second night, the sound came back. Same time. Around 2:15. This time it was louder and it lasted longer. The dragging sound went on for maybe 10 seconds and it wasn't coming from above me. It was coming from inside my apartment. From the hallway between my bedroom and the front door. I sat up in bed and turned on my bedside lamp. My bedroom door was closed, which is how I always sleep. I stared at the door and listened. The dragging stopped. Then nothing. Complete silence. I wanted to open the door and look, but something told me not to. I can't explain it. It was like a feeling in my chest, this heavy pressure that said, do not open that door. So I didn't. I sat in bed with the lamp on until the sun came up. Then I opened the door and checked the entire apartment. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Nothing moved, nothing out of place. All the locks were engaged, windows shut and locked. I told myself I had been dreaming. Hypnagogic hallucination or whatever it's called, when you hear things that aren't real as you're falling asleep or waking up. It happens to people. It's documented. I almost convinced myself of that. Then the third night happened. Same time, 2:15. I know because I had set an alarm for 2:10. I wanted to be awake and alert if the sound came back. I was sitting up in bed with the lamp on and my phone in my hand ready to call 911. At 2:13, I heard the front door of my apartment rattle. Not knock, rattle. Like someone was testing the handle from the outside, slowly, trying not to make noise. The rattle lasted about 3 seconds and then stopped. I immediately called 911. While I was on the phone, I heard the dragging sound again. This time it was coming from right outside my bedroom door. Whatever was making that sound was in the hallway. I was on the phone with the dispatcher telling her someone was inside my apartment. She told me to stay in my room and that officers were being sent. The dragging sound stopped. Then I heard footsteps, slow and soft, moving away from my bedroom door toward the front of the apartment. Then nothing. Police arrived in about 8 minutes. They cleared the apartment. Nobody was inside. The deadbolt was locked. The chain was on. The windows were shut. There was no sign of forced entry. The officer told me sometimes buildings make noises that sound like they're coming from inside your unit when they're actually coming from the walls or pipes or an adjacent apartment. He was polite about it, but I could tell he thought I was overreacting. His partner asked me if I had been drinking. I hadn't. He wrote something down and they left. I stood in my hallway after they walked out and I felt more alone than I've ever felt in my life. Not just alone, dismissed. Like what I experienced didn't matter because there wasn't a body or a broken window to prove it. Here's the thing though. When the officers left and I was walking them to the front door, I looked down at the hardwood floor in my hallway. There were marks. Long, thin scratch marks in the finish of the wood running the length of the hallway from the front door to just outside my bedroom. They were fresh. The wood underneath was lighter where the finish had been scraped off. Something had been dragged along my hallway floor, something with enough weight and sharpness to scratch through the finish of hardwood. I took photos and sent them to my building manager the next morning. He came to look at them and couldn't explain it. He checked the security camera footage from the lobby and stairwell. Nobody had entered the building between midnight and 6 a.m. on any of the 3 nights. The keypad log showed no entries during those hours either. I installed 2 cameras inside my apartment after that, one in the hallway and one in the living room. I also put a rubber doorstop under my bedroom door every night. It's been about 5 weeks since the 3rd night and nothing else has happened. The cameras have captured nothing unusual. The scratch marks are still on my floor. My building manager offered to have them refinished, but I told him not to. I want them there. They're the only proof I have that I didn't imagine the whole thing. But there is one more detail I haven't mentioned yet. About a week after I installed the cameras, I was reviewing the footage from the first night, just to make sure everything was recording properly. I noticed something. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the hallway camera picked up a slight change in the light. Nothing dramatic, just the faintest shift in the shadow near my bedroom door. like something had moved just outside the camera's frame and then stopped. I replayed it over and over. I zoomed in. I adjusted the brightness. I couldn't see anything concrete, but the shadow shifts. At 2:15, every single night I've checked. Something in my hallway changes at 2:15 a.m., and I still can't figure out what it is. I still wake up at that exact time almost every night. Not because of noise. My body just does it now. Like it's waiting for something that hasn't finished yet.
The house sitter.
This happened when I was 19. My parents were going on a 2-week cruise and they asked me to house sit while they were gone. I was in my first year of college, living in a dorm about an hour from their house, so it wasn't a big deal to drive back for winter break. Their house is in a suburban neighborhood. Nice area, quiet street. Neighbors on both sides. Nothing about this location would make you think twice about staying there alone. I grew up in that house. I knew every room, every sound, every creak in the floorboards. I felt more comfortable there than anywhere else on earth. The first week was great. I had the whole place to myself. I ate whatever I wanted, watched movies on the big TV, and had a few friends over one night. My parents called every couple of days from the ship to check in and make sure I hadn't burned the place down. Everything was completely normal until day 9. On day 9, I came home from grabbing dinner around 8 p.m. and noticed something that made me pause at the front door. The porch light was off. I always left the porch light on. Always. It was the one thing my mom had specifically asked me to do. Leave the porch light on so the house doesn't look empty. I figured the bulb had burned out. I went inside, flipped the switch, and nothing happened. I made a mental note to replace it and moved on. Later that night, around 11, I was lying in my childhood bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard a noise downstairs. It was a soft thud, followed by a scraping sound, like a window being opened. I muted my phone and listened. I heard it again. A scrape, and then a click. I got out of bed as quietly as I could and crept to the top of the stairs. The downstairs was dark. All the lights were off. I stood at the top of those stairs for what felt like 5 minutes just listening. I heard nothing else. I told myself it was the cat. My parents had a cat named Biscuit who was always knocking things over. I went back to bed. The next morning, I went downstairs and checked all the windows and doors. Everything was locked. Everything was fine. But Biscuit was acting strange. She was hiding under the couch and wouldn't come out. Biscuit never hid. She was the most social, attention-seeking cat you'd ever meet. The fact that she was pressed against the back wall under the couch, pupils dilated, ears flat, refusing to move even when I opened a can of tuna, made me uneasy. Animals pick up on things that people don't. Everyone knows that. But I pushed the thought aside and went about my day. That night, day 10, I decided to stay downstairs and watch TV in the living room. I wanted to be closer to the front door just in case. I couldn't admit to myself that I was scared, but I was definitely on edge. Around 1 in the morning, I turned off the TV to go to bed. As I was walking through the kitchen toward the stairs, I noticed something on the counter that stopped me. A knife. One of the big kitchen knives from the block. It was lying flat on the counter about 2 feet from the block. I stared at it. I had not used any knives that day. I had eaten takeout. There was no reason for that knife to be out of the block. I picked it up and put it back. My hand was shaking. I checked the knife block. All the other knives were in their slots. Only that one had been removed. I stood in the kitchen, holding onto the edge of the counter, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe I had used a knife earlier and forgot. Maybe Biscuit had knocked it out somehow, but Biscuit was a 7-pound cat, and this was a full-size chef's knife wedged into a tight wooden slot. There was no way. I checked every door and window in the house again, all locked. I checked the garage, locked. I checked the basement. Empty. I went back upstairs and locked my bedroom door. I put a chair under the handle. I lay in bed holding my phone with 911 already dialed, my thumb hovering over the call button. Biscuit was on the bed with me. She wouldn't stop staring at the bedroom door. I didn't sleep that night. Not for a single second. Day 11. I called my friend Jake and asked him to come stay with me for the rest of the week. He could tell from my voice that something was wrong, and he agreed. He showed up around noon, and I told him everything. The porch light, the sounds, the knife, Biscuit acting weird. He didn't laugh at me, which I appreciated. We spent the afternoon going through the entire house together, checking every closet, every cabinet, the attic, the crawl space under the house, everything. We found nothing. No signs of entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. Jake told me I was probably just freaking myself out being alone in a house for the first time, and honestly, I wanted to believe him. That night we stayed up late playing video games in the living room. Around midnight, Jake went to the kitchen to grab a drink. He was gone for maybe 30 seconds when he came back into the living room and his face was white. He looked at me and said, "Did you go in the kitchen while I was in the bathroom earlier?" I told him I hadn't. He told me to come look. We walked into the kitchen, and there on the counter was a knife. Same spot as before. Same knife. Lying flat on the counter 2 feet from the block. Neither of us had been in the kitchen since dinner. Neither of us had touched the knife block. We both stood there staring at it, and I watched Jake's skepticism evaporate in real time. We grabbed our keys and left the house immediately. We drove to a diner and sat there until 4 in the morning talking about what to do. Jake wanted to call the cops. I didn't know what I'd tell them. That a knife moved. They'd think I was insane. We went back to the house after sunrise and I packed a bag. I drove back to my dorm and called my parents on the ship. I told them a shortened version of what happened. My dad was skeptical. My mom wasn't. She told me something that she had never told me before. When I was about 4 years old, before I could form permanent memories, my mom had similar experiences in the house. Knives out of the block. Cabinet doors open that she had closed. Biscuit's predecessor, an older cat they had at the time, would hiss at empty rooms and refuse to enter certain parts of the house for days at a time. My mom said it went on for about 2 months and then stopped on its own. She never told anyone because she didn't think anyone would believe her. She said she always assumed it was the house and that whatever it was had gone dormant. Her exact word, dormant, like it was sleeping and I had somehow woken it up by being there alone. I asked her if she was ever scared. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said something that I think about more than I'd like to. She said she was never scared of it because it never felt threatening to her. It felt curious, like it was watching her to figure out what she was. She said the knives weren't threatening. They were placed carefully, deliberately, not thrown around or stuck into countertops. Placed flat on the counter with the handle facing the same direction every time, like someone was showing them to her. She told me she thinks it was trying to communicate and that the knives were the only language it knew. I didn't ask any follow-up questions after that. I didn't want to hear any more. My parents came home from the cruise and nothing ever happened again while they were there. I never house sat alone after that. When they travel now, they hire an actual house sitter from a service, a stranger, someone who doesn't know the history and who the house apparently doesn't care about. My parents still live there. They've never talked about selling. My mom tells me Biscuit still occasionally stares at the kitchen doorway for long stretches of time. Ears pinned back, tail low, watching something that nobody else in the room can see. My dad says she's just being a cat. My mom doesn't say anything when he says that. She just looks at the doorway too. I don't visit as often as I should, and when I do, I never stay the night. I always leave before dark. Those were 3 true horror stories from people who were home alone when something went terribly wrong. If you made it to the end of this video, drop a comment and tell me which story got to you the most. And if you have your own Home Alone horror story, leave it below. The scariest ones will be featured in a future video. Subscribe if you haven't already. New stories every week. I'll see you in the next one, and whatever you do, lock your doors tonight.